I think Texas public schools are at a turning point right now. Either they will continue to improve, as they have been doing, despite what you may have heard for the past several decades, or else they could enter a period of rapid decline. It's really up to us. And it's very, very important to look back at cases where other great civilizations made technical mistakes that led to a huge change in their fortunes. The case I've been looking at, because this is my background in physics, is how Britain lost civil aviation. Right after the Second World War, Britain was going to come back. They'd had centuries of dominance of transport, and they decided that they were going to be the first to conquer jet air travel for the public. And they did it. They brought out the de Havilland's Comet, which was years ahead of its time, years ahead of the rest of the world, a gorgeous plane to look at. The engines were recessed into the wing. It was a thing of great beauty, and for a year everything seemed to be going well. They traveled to all the corners of the empire. Nobody could touch them. And then suddenly planes began falling out of the sky. The first one was attributed to pilot error and weather. The second one fell out of clear skies. Couldn't be blamed on that. So the fleet was grounded briefly. Everyone came out, talked about the skill of the British engineers, about the fact that they were going to embody every design modification that imagination could suggest so that the fleet would once again be safe, and they brought it into the air again. And then 4 days later, another plane went down. It took a long time to figure out what the problem was, that they'd made a fundamental technical error in understanding why the planes failed. They didn't have the right theory of failure. And it was a conceptual problem. It wasn't just a minor error in how they applied it. The whole notion of why the planes were going down was wrong. That provided an opening. Provided an opening for a company that hadn't been very well known in the United States called Boeing, which up in Seattle had been a military contractor that never before had had success in civilian aircraft. Well, they brought in a grad student who studied the problems that de Havilland's had had. He very rapidly read through all of the literature on failure and cracks and fatigue and decided there was a theory not widely accepted that made sense to him. And he got Boeing to adopt it. It was a completely new way of thinking about what made an airplane safe. In this new way of thinking, you see, you can't certify that there are no cracks. You can't certify that there are no flaws. Instead, you have to make the plane flaw tolerant. And instead of thinking about it being flaw-free, you think about it being tough. It was a whole set of new ideas. Now, imagine how concerned the aircraft executives must have been at this idea that their planes were full of cracks and they were going to tolerate them. But that's the way you had to think. So with these new ideas, Paul Paris had Boeing do a series of tests and design modifications, and within a few years they carried out experiments that they taped and showed that demonstrated that they had a safer plane than anybody else on the market. It was a brilliant strategy. The techniques that were used are used to this day in order to certify aircraft safety, and 10 or 15 years later, because it took some time for the success of these methods really to be appreciated, they were mandated, and they're now used all across the world. In the beginning, everyone had to learn to think differently. And I think that's the way things are right now with our schools. The schools are going down. The schools that serve poor children are not doing well. And I believe that the fundamental problem, just like the cracks in the airplanes, is that poverty introduces flaws into the system of schooling that cause the schools to crash. We have to solve that problem. Now, there are theories for how to do this right now, but I think they are as mistaken as the theories that the British were using as the comets went down. And I think that the data show it. So what I urge everybody is look at the data. If you think that accountability by itself, that improving teacher quality by itself, and that neglecting the influences of poverty and saying that other reforms will help, then I think the data have a lot of things to tell you that say that you're not right. We have put the entire United States into an enormous testing tank. We have checked what our schools are doing. We can learn from what we have done, but we have to do it quickly, because if we don't, just as the United States took civil aviation away from Britain, so the rest of the world will take technical supremacy away from us.